as to what they needed for their progress. And the Black Baptists of Alabama were convinced that education was the key. They said without education, blacks will perish. But with education, blacks will uplift themselves.
After 5 years of tireless effort, William McAlpine won his battle. In 1878, the Alabama Baptist Normal and Theological School, now known as Selma University, opened its doors. McAlpine's victory showed that our people could move forward on their own, even when white people opposed them. Can you imagine how much courage it took for William McAlpine to go ahead with this plan just a decade after he'd been a slave?
You're talking about a person who had a great, I think, sense of self, and who also believed in the intellect and in the integrity of African Americans.
Our ancestors' ultimate goal was full equality. They wanted the same rights as white people, and they wouldn't settle for less. One of the greatest differences between slavery and freedom would be the right to vote.
There was a tremendous sense of opportunity among African Americans because they thought that they could use the political system to change their situation. You know, it was a tremendous time. It was a revolutionary time in the South.
These are the state returns for the Charleston County House of Representatives election of 1872. Out of 70 candidates, voters chose 20 representatives to serve in the state assembly.
Wow, Jay Tingman.
At just 27 years old, Julius Caesar Tingman was elected to the South Carolina state legislature.
All makes sense now. It all makes sense. When I was a kid, I wanted to be president. That was the job I wanted. It was the only job I wanted besides comedian. I wanted to be president of the United States of America. And my mother would go, "No, don't say that." I mean, because, I was born February 7th. 4 days later, Malcolm X is shot.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, that was the world I was born into. Like, you want to be somebody? That might get you killed.
Well, your ancestor was a former slave with no property, obviously, to speak of. But he was a literate man, and he had served his country during the war. Now, at the time, the state legislature was majority black, without a doubt, just like the population of South Carolina was. Throughout the former Confederacy, there were African-American elected officials at every level of government. It really was a whole new era. The whole world had been turned upside down, and black folks ruled.
So I'm gone from being sad and crying to be like, I'm pissed off that, like, how in the world can I not know this?
Former slaves like Chris Rock's great-great-grandfather now govern the very people who had once owned them. In South Carolina, which boasted the greatest number of black elected officials, the freedmen's dream of a true interracial democracy seemed to be a reality. Finally, they could right centuries of wrongs. And this was exactly what their former masters feared most.
The white residents of South Carolina viewed the Reconstruction-era government here in South Carolina as being illegitimate, as being corrupt, as being, in fact, I'll use this word, barbaric. They believed that African Americans were not qualified to serve in the legislature, to pass laws that governed the lives of white citizens in particular.
The defeated Southerners resented their loss of wealth and power. Their bitterness fueled racial tensions that erupted into violence. The government had to send almost 2,000 federal troops to South Carolina just to keep the peace. Yet our ancestors would not be intimidated. your great-great-grandfather ran for office again in 1876.
Julius Caesar Tingman, the gift that keeps giving.
Now, here are the results of that election.
I see his name. Wow. Yeah, it's like it's staring me in the face. You know, you hear the thing parents always say, I want my kids to see blankety blank so they know they can become anything. I mean, it's weird. If I'd have known this, there's a good chance I wouldn't be a comedian.
What would you become?
Until I lucked into a comedy club at, age 20, just on a whim, I assumed I would pick up things for white people for the rest of my life. If I'd have known this, it would have taken away the inevitability that I was going to be nothing.
When Chris Rock's great-great-grandfather won his second term in 1876, tensions came to a head. Disputed elections for the presidency and for South Carolina's governorship resulted in a standoff that lasted for months. Finally, the white Republicans, who had been the Freedmen's allies, betrayed them in exchange for the White House. In return, they gave control of the South back to the Democrats. Reconstruction was over. In 1877, President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes, pulled all the federal troops out of the South. Bad day for the brothers and the sisters. The contested legislators, like your great-great-grandfather, were kicked out of office.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, he was the man, right? And then these races come in, kick him out.
Yeah, mind-blowing.
Right away, the new government turned back the clock on progress, reducing black people to second-class citizens. Their dream of true equality was shattered. Many African Americans left home in search of a brighter future, including some of my mother's ancestors. The Howard family, my great-grandfather's brothers, moved away from West Virginia in the 1880s, even though they owned hundreds of acres of land in these hills. My Uncle David Coleman has brought me here for the first time. This was our family's property?
Yeah, this is where it all started.
Why do you think they left?
Well, things were hard here. Most of them were farmers or laborers. And back in those days, you weren't getting much money labor-wise. And the prejudice that we went through in the early days and so on. Things got rough, and that's a port town up there in Steubenville, and somehow, some way, somebody let them know that there was availability of work up there.
How in the world did they get from here to Steubenville, Ohio, in the 1880s?
Well, my mother always told me the story that 6 wagon loads left here and forfeited everything they had. And just went into Steubenville and hadn't heard from a lot of them since then.
During these hard times, Maya Angelou's grandmother, Marguerite, was born. Now, you knew her as Grandmother Baxter, right?
That's right.
In I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, you describe your grandmother Baxter as quadroon or octoroon, I'm quoting, or in any case, she was nearly white. Did you ever wonder why your grandmother was so light-complected?
No, because there were all sorts of light-complected people in the family. Like most African-American families, we ranged in color from plum blue to milk white.
That's right.
So, no, I didn't.
The circumstances of Maya's grandmother's birth suggest that the racial dynamic of slavery had never really changed.